It's here. It's now. It's 2026. What do we do? What do we do? What can we do? What the is going on? 2026. It's here. It's good. Or is it? Only time will tell. Or will it? Bang! Welcome in, everybody, to 2026. I think that's what it is. Seems to say that on my calendars, after all. Gustavs should be here shortly to help me through this live stream, which will be quite fun because we're going to talk about the new year and what it means and what just happened because I don't think we know. So it'd be good to explore what we do know and what we don't know and what we see and why what we see might be different depending upon where you are. I think that if you're in the US, you see things one way. And if you're not, you see things any number of other ways. I'm not assuming if you're in the US, you see things the same at all. Which, the US is a big place. You may not see things the same way from different parts of the US, but you definitely don't see things the same as people in Europe, which is why Gustavs has decided to join me. Thank you, sir. It's good to see you.
Okay. Yes, I'm the European consultant, I suppose, for the time being. So
Excellent.
maybe I can offer some perspective on that.
Yeah, there was something you mentioned on the Discord the other day about Maduro and how that's being viewed over there, which I thought was very interesting. And what so why don't you share kind of some of your thoughts on just what's being talked about over there versus how it's being discussed over here, we'll say, which is quite a bit different. And again, depends on where are you in the United States? What are your leanings? Because there's a lot of different views on that situation.
I don't know exactly what people in the US are saying, but in Europe, there's that people don't really know how to frame it. People don't know what to think about it.
Hmm.
About the situation is that the US military went into Venezuela and captured Maduro, the longtime El Presidente of Venezuela, of a socialist dictatorship. Yeah, we could maybe talk about like definitions or whatever, but pretty much that is what it is. Like nobody really argues with that. But people don't really know what to do with it because there's this objection or sort of question: were international rights violated in this operation? Were is it like a pro stability thing? Is it like what motivates this? Is it oil? Is it capitalism? Is it democracy? Is it being pro Russia? Is it being anti Russia? China? What is China like? Is China the motivating thing? Is it like the big U.S. Chinese trade war? Is it about drugs? Because that's a big one. That's the one that I think Trump himself kind of talks about for a long time.
Yeah.
And on top of all of this, there's the question of consent, because I don't know. I've heard some people have mentioned to me that actually he may have consented to being brought out. Maduro, that he there was an agreement that there wouldn't be that much fighting or anything. That he would, it seems that his army didn't fight, but
Didn't do
also
anything.
that he may have consented to it himself, which adds another layer of complexity to it all, but people are struggling to find ways to talk about it and to explain it because there's all of these points of view going around, and people can mention these as motivating factors, but they still can't really make a judgment on it in the end.
Right.
And they're more concerned about extrapolating this into the future into something that is relevant to themselves. So mostly that has to do with Ukraine right now, and people are making, which is also very interesting. People are making projections into the Greenland thing, because people are now
Oh.
talking about how Trump will be they they're using very aggressive language to describe like the various offers of Greenland joining the US, like to some degree or something, like transferring ownership or sphere of influence or whatever. That is very aggressive language. They're calling it like a takeover. People are talking about an invasion, and I don't see any evidence for that. But people are,
Yeah.
extrapolating these things. They're talking about how an aggressive move of like taking out the dictator can solve the problems. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? So yeah, so that's something I think maybe not so common in the US.
So it's basically confusion because people are trying to do their own math and they're not good at the math. And also it depends what details you bring to the fore, right? So you can always point out like China's getting oil against an oil embargo. So what's going on, right? And that's one frame. Or you could say, hey, drugs are a problem in the United States. Both of these are true at the same time, by the way, right? Or you can say, hey, he's a horrible dictator and he's basically stealing from his people, just like Saddam Hussein did in Iraq. And we didn't. It, yeah, we don't even understand the second Iraq conflict because we don't understand it's the second conflict and has a continuity in history, and so also there were weapons of mass destruction. But I have a whole video on that. Isn't that hard? Double psyop. Good job, guys. And it's the same here. Like people are just looking at things and they're picking their favorite thing and then trying to. I like the term that you use, extrapolate out what's going on and how that affects other things. And so we very much, I think, in 2026 are moving away from the this happened and therefore into the personal extrapolation land where people are going to be like, well, obviously, if this is done, then these other things will happen in these other arenas that aren't necessarily connected. Or, I mean, the problem is everything's connected in a way, but everything isn't connected in every way, and everything isn't necessarily connected in the way that you see or know about or realize. And I think that's really confusing people. I think people are very confused because we're still in this postmodern sort of hell where people think that they can understand the narrative for themselves by themselves with only their own information. And that's kind of ridiculous. So I don't know why we're stuck with that particular situation, but it sort of leads to an indication that maybe 2026 is going to be the year where everyone's going to extrapolate about everything all the time.
Yeah, well, people are doing it a lot. People are, uh, yeah, trying to capture all these things and just do that. But yeah, I think the one sort of frame or perspective that people are having on Venezuela and also in Greenland and other things is the kind of uh pacifist perspective where Trump is really crossing that boundary a lot lately, or the US is, or however you want to put it, really, is that yeah, there's this military, like really, you can call this a special military operation in Venezuela. Really, it really
Mhm.
was, and the question can be whether it was violent, because it doesn't seem to have been very violent, but it did involve people with guns and crossing uh, legal boundaries and things like that. But it's perhaps it has avoided a much larger and bloodier conflict. And if that's the trade-off, then a lot of people who are pacifists and consider violence, the largest transgression and something that is
Hmm.
an super important boundary to maintain at all costs
Yeah.
is the boundary of physicality or something like that. And this extrapolates also to like Ukraine, I guess, and to other things. And it kind of goes into the consent question because uh, the objective then, if you want to stay behind the boundary of violence, is that you need to do everything consensually.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I think it's a good way to think about these things. I mean, I just want to state up front, just in case anybody hasn't heard it a million times before. There's no such thing as international law. That makes no sense. You can't apply a legal system to something that doesn't have a government, a single government, right? Legal systems are a function of governance, and therefore the government is the thing that defines the legal system in some form or other and modifies it. International is the statement of multiple areas of governance, and therefore law does not apply because there's no single government over international, as much as the globalists want that to be. And I think that's why they use those terms, right? They want that to happen. The closest thing we have to rules at the international level is UCC, which is Uniform Commercial Code, because those are trading regulations, mostly around ocean trading, by the way, right? And that's where all that comes from. Those are trading regulations. And yet sometimes they're adjudicated in courts, but usually local courts in the place where the transgression happened, right? And so this idea of international courts and international law is very sketchy. I can understand why the globalists want that, but also I hate the globalists and I don't like their stuff.
So how is the US talking about this?
Well, in the US, what people are doing is, because everybody's convinced they fall into two camps, except for the conservatives. Um, Everyone's like, well, Trump did this because he's a dictator and he's dangerous. He takes over other. When's he going to start arresting politicians? And I'm like, well, not soon enough. He should have done that in his first term, because it's strange, right? On the one hand, they're like, we don't want the law applied to the people that we like, the Democrats who are doing illegal things left, right, and center. Um, but we want the law applied to him, right? And so all of that is coming out. And on the other side, people are like, well, you know what? The Venezuelan people have been suffering for a long time. They seem to be on board. A lot of the media, because the media is heavily democratic here, so they're all crazy leftists. They are, trying to find people that will agree with this leftist sentiment that this is a bad thing, and they're interviewing Venezuelans, and they're all like, "Yeehaw! Finally, about time." We're living in poverty. We have all this oil, and we're selling it to China and getting nothing for it. Let's sell it to the U.S. instead. And the reporters are all caught off guard, which is really weird. I'm like, do you just not research anything ever? Do you not talk to people? Have you not gotten out of your house lately? Like, kids, they live in a bubble, right? They live in a fake pseudo elitist bubble. And so there's this, stark dichotomy. There's that, and there's Nick Shirley going around exposing fraud in Minnesota at daycare centers, and then other people are doing that, right? It's the same thing. The media is following the same pattern. They're trying to make this into a bad thing, that fraud's getting exposed, and it's not working. Like, it's flat out not functioning correctly. And so there's just a lot of confusion here about where you land on the issue. And um, the people that tend to talk about international law the most are leftists, because they want the law, which is easy for them to understand because they're a little stupid, to be the thing that mediates everything. Because they believe it falls on their side in all cases. For some, I guess they can't read or don't read or something. I don't know. I really don't understand it. Every time I see it, I get kind of freaked out. But it doesn't fall in only two courts, because a lot of people are like, well, the problem with doing this is that now we're getting dangerously close to being okay being involved in a foreign war, And there's a huge faction of people in the U.S. who don't care what else Trump does as long as he gets us out of foreign wars. There's a lot of people in that camp, right? You might call them isolationists. I think that's a bit unfair. There's a huge overlap for sure. Like all isolationists don't want foreign war, but I don't think everybody who doesn't want foreign war is an isolationist by any means. And then there's a bunch of people who are just, you know, in the US, they use it to play political football. The problem is none of them are politicians. They're just voters. And so you can't play political football when you're a spectator in the stands. Like, what are you doing? You're trying to convince your friends to vote differently? That's not going to work. They probably aren't even listening to you because you're a lunatic. Like nobody when I was growing up in New England, there were two things no one ever discussed in public. And that was politics and religion. Everybody knew this. Like nobody ever did that when I was growing up. So I'm just living in this
Well,
weird world, you know?
yeah, I'm kind of thinking that you yourself are a political player when you're one voter in a couple million, is that you project that onto other people and then you make them your enemy or something. You
Yeah.
see it as like a constant conflict. Like I don't know. It just falls flat when you consider the how low the influence is. Like, does it? Do you think it holds true for, let's say, the two competing presidential election candidates at the end?
Yeah, no, I mean, the problem is that people don't understand the aggregation of numbers very well. And so you can always see that votes tip the vote because that's what voting is. This is not a physicist PhD level statement here, right? Um, but then you don't know what that means. And so, like in past elections, people have had these, pretty loud arguments over oh, the votes in Florida flipping the election, right? Because voting, we don't have a direct democracy. We don't have anything like that, thank goodness. In the United States, we're not a democracy. We're a republic, thank goodness. Although we're not using that, and we needed to be a couple of elections ago to fix a voting problem, uh, which is clear now. Although I would argue it was clear then. And so people are caught in this. I think the fundamental problem in the U.S. is because identity pretty much everywhere is shattered, people are using politics as part of an identifier for themselves. It's part of identity. And that causes an unhealthy tribalism. Tribalism in and of itself is inevitable. Like this whole tribalism bad. I'm like, single digit IQ thinking there for sure. Tribalism is inevitable. Nature's trying to kill you. You need partners, you need cooperation, you need help. But the question is, what do you tribe up about? And if it's politics, you're in a lot of trouble because, A, it's a binary for some reason, pretty much everywhere. It's pretty much left, right, everywhere, which is bizarre. Even though I would argue in Europe, there's no right, and there hasn't been since maybe Churchill or something. But this is a different consideration. That when you have that situation where people are trying to identify in the tribe of politics, and then of course you're going to want to grow that tribe, right? And one way to grow the tribe is to shrink the other tribe through war, by the way. So you run into these problems, and I don't want to call it, I mean, I try to my New Year's resolution is now to stop using the term psychology in such a positive fashion. So I'm not going to use basic psychology. I'm going to say human behavior, right? Because that's observable. It doesn't need a science. It doesn't, you just look, right? That's human behavior. So human behavior is just such that you have to have tribes. Tribes are part of your identity, although they may or may not be the whole thing. That's a much longer topic for a different day, right? And so you have people, particularly in the US, but I think this is probably true in Europe, you can let me know, who are using their political stance as part of who they are, which is a mistake, because those are just decisions that you make that can change. And then they're also casting other people that way as well. So the classic case here is you've got this guy Mandami, who I guess ran as a Democrat, but is actually a socialist. And everyone's freaking out. They're like, well, they voted for a socialist. And I'm like, well, no, technically they didn't because there's no socialist on the ballot. So if you're talking about voting, they voted for a Democrat. Now that Democrat, because the labels Democrat and Republican are voting conveniences and have nothing to do with viewpoints. What you end up with is a situation where you can't understand the world because you can have a socialist running as a Democrat and you don't know how to identify them because you're using the wrong moniker, right? Trump is not a Republican. Trump has never been a Republican. Trump, his political position has never changed in his whole life, as near as I can tell. He's the most consistent politician ever in the history of politics. He said it on Oprah, like, I'm friends with Bill Clinton. I voted for Bill Clinton, right? I disagree with Bill Clinton on China and trade. He hasn't changed one whit. And he was a Democrat. And he's on record saying it's probably easier to rig the Republicans than the Democrats. And then he ran as a Republican years later. None of this should be a surprise. Like, it's all out in the open, and he said what he was going to do. And people persist in thinking that Trump is a Republican. And I'm like, Trump is the least Republican we've probably ever had in this country. Like, he is not a Republican, but they're using those false monikers of the convenience of voting and the convenience of having a understandable democratic system, which is a necessity because I don't think people, again, we're in this postmodern world where people think like, well, if I had all the information arrayed out in front of me, yeah, your head would explode. Like, you can't have a fraction of the information on any subject laid out in front of you. That's not going to happen, right? And then I could make a better decision. And I was like, no, the more information you have, the harder a decision gets because you have more variables to consider. It's not a magic trick, right? This is basic human behavior, right? And it's backed up by psychological research, by the way. So whatever, I mean, if you want to go that route, you can. You're going to find the same answer because that's how the world works. It's not that hard. It's not a magic trick, right? It's just how things work. And so in the US, we have a lot of confusion because of this identity problem. And so I'd be interested to know, in Europe, do they have a similar identity problem around voting or politics or however you want to frame that?
I really don't. I don't think we do have the same thing. Definitely not in my circles and wider. I really do not think so. People have yeah, people have their tribal allegiance. People have their tribe, their nation, their folk or whatever. That is the, and many people have multiple actually, and they have a grandfather who was Polish, and now they live in Germany, and everyone has many stories like that. But we don't. It's I would say it's more like people trying to maintain those same categories for really long times, which is what Versailles was based around, and all this is that we need to have exactly these categories in perpetuity, and the whole system has been shaped around that, and they're pretty, in some ways they're pretty solid categories. Like, they can't really be deconstructed at this point. You just can't you just can't wipe the concept of French out at this point. Like, it's just, yeah, it's messy and it's messed up, and right now they have it in the wrong direction. But the category of French is probably gonna persist for a while longer, or Italian, right? So they've there's been a lot of work put into establishing these categories and maintaining them, and everybody kind of understands where they are, where they're from, and yeah, many of them do have also an understanding of the city that they're from. I met a nice guy who was from Bari in Italy, and they have like a different identity. They speak a funny way, and those sorts of things. But we don't have the voting problem. It's more like there's this set of identities that exists that is very rigid, and people can't change them, and that's a different problem.
Yeah, and is it a problem? Like, is it creating an actual problem, or is it more just
Well,
something
it's
that's
yeah.
working
I
fine?
mean, look at like the Yugoslavia, right? You have like these different categories which were established as different categories. They got put into one single state, which was Yugoslavia, which was based on them all being Southern Slavs. So there was a commonality. They're mutually intelligible, largely written differently. So, for example, Serbian's written Cyrillic, but Croatia uses Latin letters, the Latin alphabet, things like that. But these categories, they're distinct. They are distinct categories. You know, Croatian and Bosnian are very different. And I know some people who came from a Croatian town in Bosnia and they had to leave in the 90s and as children, and they're still mourning it, and they still think of themselves as Bosnian Croats, for example.
Hmm.
Um, so they couldn't mix like the Croatian and Bosnian. Yes, they were in one single larger, you know, was Yugoslavian empire, probably not, but you know, this one large unit, federation or something, and then kind of people mix around, and at some point the categories just can't mix that well, and something explodes, and then you have to draw sharp lines. So, for example, the Slovakia was for a very long time in the Hungarian kingdom, right? People nowadays would call it an empire in the larger, broader Hungarian kingdom. And at the end of the First World War, Slovakia was established as a very separate state, and there were exchanges of peoples where Hungarians were sent out of Slovakia and Slovakians out of Hungary. So these borders were drawn, and the categories were kind of pre-established at some point. I'm not sure exactly when, but yeah, these ethnic categories are very, very solid, and people know which one they are, and yeah,
Mm.
maybe they may be aware of being Czech and Slovak, for example. So they have multiple allegiances, but
Yeah.
people very much can tell you where exactly they're from, even if they've lived in another place for a, a couple of generations. And I think that largely determines a lot of the voting patterns, at least in the eastern part of Europe.
That's fascinating. So then if there's a if you look at things, I mean a lot of people use a lot of names for this, right? They I guess the biggest name would necessarily have to be meta crisis, right? But of course, you know, I'm just casting this as the intimacy crisis. But if you look at it in terms of, we'll call it a global crisis, and you add in the fact that, you know, lots of people have been talking about this for years now, that there's an issue with identity. I think Jonathan Peugeot is the one who talks about the issue of identity or something, right? A lot. And I think if you view that as, we'll say, part of the baseline fundamental discrepancy or crisis that everyone is dealing with, more or less at the same time, although not entirely. Like the Russians seem to be fine. They sort of went through it early, I would say, with the breakup of the Soviet Union. Um, I think what we're suffering from in a hangover type fashion is that we're stuck with the problem of identity within the frame of the project of modernity, right? And then, of course, modernity I renamed to the age of gnosis. And so, because everyone's trying to hold up knowledge as the highest value, they're then saying, all right, well, epistemologically, what does that mean for me? Well, first, I need to identify who and what I am, right? And then that's failing because your identity is assigned. It's not something you get for yourself. So the individualism that's sort of enabled or enforced by effectively the Protestant Reformation opens that door, really causes all of these other downstream effects because people expect that either they know or should know their identity and therefore they can find, you know, knowledge of the world based on, you know, based on who they are, right? Because they need to fit into the world. So just knowing the world wouldn't be enough anyway. Um, and that's the problem, is that if you don't understand where you fit in the world, you're in domicide. I mean, this is what Dr. Vervaeke talks about, right? You're automatically in domicide. And then once you're stuck in domicide, now you have two problems, right? You're an individual, you're stuck in domicides, you're already trying to separate yourself from a tribe, which, as I pointed out earlier, you need a tribe to survive. Nature will kill you on your own. All right. And so you want an identity so you know, quote, which tribe to go through. And then everyone's looking up at the things outside of them from below, we'll say. They may not view it that way. They may think politics is, quote, beneath them or something, but they're looking at it like you're not politics. Politics includes you, so it's bigger. They're looking at the world that way, and that's more of a problem in the US because everyone here is from a different region. I mean, that's why I really liked Colin Woodard's American Nations. I thought it was a great book because it really pointed out you can divide the US quite nicely into regions of immigration, roughly speaking, right? Where people came from and what they brought with them when they came. And that informs a lot of things. And it shows up on all kinds of maps of other things, like what crops are being grown and what goods are being created, right? It shows up and it maps immediately back to the immigration map. And so there's something to that, right? What there is to
So,
that,
so, so like this European conception of the ethnic identity and this procession of identity through time, it does kind of follow onto the US, but the US integrates it in a completely different way. So and it's young and it's very blurred, so it can't really do that so much.
it doesn't
But
have it. It doesn't have it.
yeah, yeah,
It
it
took
doesn't.
it from the old world. I mean, that's why we stole buildings block by block and brought them over here from Europe, right? Like our museums are full of art from Europe, right? We're taking everything from the past, from the place of our past, which means we don't really have a past of our. I mean, it's a brand new country. It's 250 years, right? Like this is a pretty new experiment still,
Well,
although
it's
it's
the
gone
Greek
well.
Roman thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Taking stuff from the Greeks and all that.
yeah. Well, I mean, we fused Greece, and Rome. I talked with Adam about that in a video, right? So we fused Greece and Rome to an extent no one else has, and I think if you think that's a function of the Enlightenment, you're wrong. Low IQ take, right? Like at best, it's the Scottish Enlightenment where they like rather explicitly. It's not like they were listening to the idiot French Enlightenment thinkers, as no one ever should. Obviously, French. It should have been a hint. That's why the French Canadian left, right? The French people went to Canada because even the French can't stand the French. That's how that works. So I think that's why Europe seems like it's in a better place. Although I would argue Europe's like,
What do you mean?
like
Does it seem it's in a bad place?
well, from our perspective, it does, right? From the U.S. perspective, Europe seems pretty stable. Even though, if you watch real carefully, you can hear these European leaders of these tiny places by our standards say, war, we're going to commit troops. And you don't even have any troops. What troops are you going to commit? You got like 4 people with guns somewhere in your country, maybe? Come on. Like, what are we talking about here? Right. And it's weird, right? Because from my perspective, not from everybody's perspective, there's a lot of people who they don't know anything about Europe. They've never talked to people who live there. They've never been there. Right. I've been there a couple times, 3 times now, various parts of Europe. And they have this weird idea of what Europe is and what it looks like over there, and they don't really understand it's a continent and there's a lot of countries and those countries are small. And I don't know if you know this, but they went through this big war and now none of them have armies, to speak of. And yeah, they all have socialized medicine, but they don't have armies. That there might be a connection there. England famously traded their naval superiority for the NHS, right? So, we don't see our own effect on the continent of Europe from the perspective of the Great War. We don't even see it. We don't even consider it because I think history starts at the end of the Great War, even though the Great War is not even close to over, guys. So World War III, yes. We'll see what that looks like. Hopefully the US can actually not be nostalgic for its past and just say, you know what, our ancestors are going to fight, and we'll just have to let them do it because maybe that's the only way they can resolve it, right? Third time's the charm, guys. Um, but what do you see over there in terms specifically of the rhetoric? I mean, I've heard like three different, high level government officials, one of them like the top dog in various countries in Europe talking about, no, we need to go to war in Ukraine and stuff. But I'm just like, what are you saying?
Well, lots of people are kind of yeah, it's like on the discussion board is this question of how much the European countries can get involved in Ukraine, and this question of do we do it individually, do we collectively, do we do it as some sort of pact or something? It's a bit complicated, but I don't really hear that much of people saying that they want to commit their own troops, but there is a bit
Mm,
of um confusion sort of about like the cultural differences or something with Ukraine. And there's also like between the rest of Europe and Ukraine because people are talking a lot about integrating Ukraine into the EU immediately, effective immediately, like we could do it yesterday. They're not really aware of the costs of that or the problems with that, really, and they can just hand wave them away. And there's a lot of like people aren't pe- pe- many people are viewing the victory of Ukraine right now as regaining all the territories that have been occupied by Russia for like I don't know over 10 years now, and all of that kind of stuff. Which is I'll say I think it's unrealistic that Ukraine is going to get back Crimea, and maybe some other bits. A bit unrealistic at this point, and anything other than that is a victory of Russia and a failure of Ukraine. So to
mm,
secure victory, you need to get back to the borders of uh, 20 years ago in Ukraine, and it means that they don't consider peace a victory or anything like that.
mm,
Um, and they're not considering the cost that this war has on Ukraine and any criticism of it or yeah the in informational like there's many psyops and it's frustrating because honestly me even pointing out that yeah there's lots of corruption and something should be done about that and there needs to be justice for that corruption in Ukraine. Me pointing that out makes me a pro-Russian asset in the eyes of many people. Really, it
wow.
does. Yeah, it
Yeah,
does. and
yeah.
and many people are very anti. So I'm living in Budapest in Hungary for many reasons, but I've good reasons to be here. Mainly what do you call them? Mercantile reasons. But yes, I'm here, and I've got a little bit of passive aggression actually from my people back home in Latvia, because I'm living in this country that whose leader is Viktor Orban, who I'm not quite sure it would be right to call him a friend of Putin. I really don't think so. They've given money to Ukraine in the war. They've taken many Ukrainian refugees and everything, but Orban has negotiated a deal where he can import gas from Russia, unlike the rest of Europe. So he's met Putin, he's talked with him, and he is importing Russian gas right now. Nobody else in Europe is. There's an embargo on the rest of Europe. So people consider him to be Putin's best friend and Trump's best friend as well. Yeah, right, because they're buddies,
Mm.
and they talk. So it's a bit of a mess. But I've received passive aggression and things like that from people who really dislike me for being here. Actually, just for being in this
Wow.
country because there's this prime minister here, and
Hmm. Well, that's very much identity politics style, US style. Right. And it just, we don't see it because it's along different lines that we don't draw and that we don't have, quite honestly. Right. And yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem um, is, as you pointed out earlier, well, this action, which is, Maduro. getting captured. How does that affect the Greenland situation? And it's like, well, not at all. I think I don't like why are those two things attached in your mind? But I think that's what happens. So there's sort of two kind of side effects from this individualism. One is everything that's bigger than you or outside of your control. Let's just assume, Gustavs, that you are not in fact a government official of any government that has any, we'll say, executive level power to do anything. Is that a safe assumption? Uh, he says knowingly. Yeah. So if you want something done at that layer of the world, right? That layer of reality, we'll call it. Um, you have to project that to someone else. You have to expect other people to do that. Like there's no way. Like if you wanted Orban to condemn Trump and Putin, you can't even go up and talk to him about it. Right? I mean, it's not. And so, as an individual, which you're not, and I know you're not, but like as an individual, someone who's trying to be an individual, which is an impossible situation, has to expect other people to take control of that situation, while at the same time living the performative contradiction of not wanting to be controlled themselves because they're an individual. And I'm like, no one sees this dichotomy here, huh? No one. And they really don't, which is even more scary. They don't see the fundamental conflict in I want to be an individual who tells other people what to do in order to make the world the way I want. But I don't want anybody to do that to me. And then, of course, everybody ends up doing that to everybody because you're all trying to be individuals. So, of course, what other outcome could there possibly be? It's inevitable. I think that's where people get confused. And so that is going on in Europe too. Just there's way more lines and there's way more. And then at the same time, there's this confusion. As an individual, I'm looking out over the world and going, well, what's connected? Ukraine's a country, Greenland's a country, and Venezuela's a country, and Russia's a country. And if we can invade Venezuela, then we could have invaded and taken Putin out too, I guess. I that doesn't make any sense at all in the real world. I understand that, but I don't think people who are trying to understand something that much bigger than themselves can make that distinction as clearly, or at least not as many of them as you might hope. And I think it's one of these sayings. I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but the only thing that really continually amazes me in the world, in terms of human behavior, is how stupid people are. I'm just constantly getting surprised by that, and how many stupid people there are, because I'm constantly getting surprised by that too. Right?
Oh, listen, so a lot of this talk is sort of a lot of stuff that I'm hearing is this sort of large geopolitics talk about how Trump's gonna then turn on China, and then China's gonna do this, and then Venezuela will tank the Russian dollar. So it's all like this 5D chess game, right? And lots of people are doing that sort of talk,
Yeah.
and it's very popular on YouTube,
Yeah.
uh,
Right.
and on Twitter, and I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that so the conversation moved away from this about 4.5 years ago, maybe, or maybe 5 years ago. No, 5.5 years. What year is it again? How do you math? I don't know how to math. Um, Shortly after the fake news virus scamdemic, the conversation, and it had been about this before, but it really moved to sense making, and we moved past that. Like people have moved past the sense making thing. And instead everyone's jumped into YouTube and started to make YouTube channels, guilty as charged, um, around sense making. And I'm just going to tell you, not to brag, like I've got it right and they're all stupid. So I'm just going to tell, like, I'm sorry, but also, like, if you want practical tools that single persons can use to understand what's going around you better, like, actually, this is the place to be, like my channel. Sorry, just absolute. It's working for a ton of people. I want it to work for everybody. Come watch, come watch. Um, so when you don't have those tools, or when the tools you have don't work, right? Like let's suppose you're thinking of things in terms of quote geopolitics, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean, another undefinable term that can't mean anything. Um, you're going to be sadly disappointed at the predictions that get made, and you're going to have to choose between a number of different, we'll say, equally likely outcomes and which one to believe. And so then that boils down to this idea of narrative enchantment, and that video is coming out at like 3 in the morning tomorrow. So, but the last video I put out, the last recorded video I put out on the channel, was the demonstration of how that works in a debate. But this idea that once you tie something together, once you build something in the video I did, it's a dock, right? We put together a dock, and then we take out the pillars that hold up the dock, and the dock doesn't collapse because that's how sense making works. Once you've gone through the hard work, or perceived hard work, of sense making, the idea that you're wrong becomes expensive. So in other words, if let's suppose I have somebody from Europe on a live stream. Oh, I did that already. And I ask them, like, what's going on over there, right? And you tell me something. I don't have a preconceived notion. That's why I asked the question. It's not a magic trick. I asked the question. I don't know. I'm not over there right now. And maybe if I were over there right now, that wouldn't help me much, because I wouldn't be living there, right? And you kind of live in a bunch of countries, so you've been all over the place, and you travel, and so you have all this experience, and probably almost all the people are from one European country or another, right? So um, that's one thing. But then if I go, hey, Gustavs, we talked about, what you're seeing about Maduro, before this live stream, and you said this, and then let's suppose I had interpreted it a certain way. So I actually have a belief now, right? And then you said, no, 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 Mark, that's completely wrong. You're overly polite. So you'd probably say, I'm sorry if I gave you that impression, because you do crazy things like that that are unnecessary. And then you'd correct me, right? That's something else, and that's significant, but that's relatively easy, especially for me, who doesn't hold ideas all that closely anyway, to kind of let go of. But if I were talking to somebody else and they spun this tale about, well, all the people over here in Ireland think that this Maduro thing was really just a signal to Europe that they need to follow the US's lead, or Trump is going to go in and start arresting European leaders. And then I took that on, and I said, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? There's the sense making. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I've just emotionally invested in that story. And now, if you come along and say, no, Mark, that's silly. The people in Ireland are, first of all, they're Irish. That should be a hint. I love my Irish brethren, but also Irish love to tell stories. And it would be harder for you to convince me that that was wrong.
Yeah. Well, people who are deeply enchanted by the wrong thing, right? They're effectively possessed, basically.
Right.
Really, like
Right.
that's a
Yeah.
different word for it. Like, it's a more religious word, but people who are really committed to the idea that everything is anti or pro China, that's honestly in Europe, it's crazy. But I think there's a couple people like that out there. I'm sure there are. Probably they got these ideas from YouTube videos. Uh,
Probably.
and if they're doing important things and this is a problem, honestly, like, yes, you can talk to them. You can try to do well and change their minds, or present evidence, or give them something better to do. But if they refuse and they view everything in this bad way that leads to bad outcomes and doesn't make any sense to anyone else, then you kind of just have to non-consensually remove them from the picture a little bit, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
and that's, maybe if some leader in Europe becomes completely crazy and starts ranting about there being hybrid warfare between US and Europe, in Greenland, then like that's a problem. That's a problem if they're misled in this way. And yeah, like maybe you do have to go in and remove them at that point.
Yeah. Well, and it's not it's interesting, right? So you said, possession is basically a religious term, which I think is correct. It's one of the problems is we're not using better words, which are all happen to be religious, to describe the world. But they co-opt that word, right? They use ideological possession to try to secularize the term, and it doesn't work because it makes no sense. Um, Fundamentally, like, what is an what is an ideology? How do you differentiate it from an idea, since the root word is idea? And it just gets messy real fast in language. And a lot of what's being played are language games. The whole social justice, which is an impossible combination of terms in any language, doesn't make any sense and cannot be made any sense of. I think people get confused. It's okay for you as a person to hold those ideas and communicate those ideas to your family and friends that you have physical access to, because they can smack you around, maybe physically, because maybe that's what you need to snap you out of it. Snapping people out of it is a real phenomena that actually I've done, and it works. Sorry. Maybe it doesn't work as reliably as people like, but nothing else looks as reliably as I'd like either. So it's kind of like a Tuesday to me. Um, but it's another thing when you have the ability to have a YouTube channel, or go on a YouTube channel and transmit to, a few thousand people. And then what are you filtering for, right? Because it's not a thousand random people. This is another thing people always miss. Samples matter. Who are you sampling for, say on Rumble versus YouTube? Those are different types of people, right? The people on Rumble are looking for people who got kicked off of YouTube or wouldn't be allowed on YouTube because their ideas or their statements are too extreme, or maybe their style of entertainment is a little too hyperbolic and situationally dicey for YouTube. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Nick Fuentes. Whether their ideas are actually what they purport or whether it's entertainment, it doesn't matter to YouTube at some level, right? Because they're beholden to some kind of normative order that, quite honestly, Rumble is rebelling against the normative order, which is for better or for worse. But when you can transmit to these people, so now we're not talking about an idea or a concept or a way of making sense of the world that a person has. We're talking about their audience and the influence that person has on the audience. And so Sally Joe brought this up a while ago. I think it was a couple months ago. She brought up the concept of polite society. And so we've been sort of framing things in terms of polite society. I don't care what your personal beliefs are that you tell to your family and friends. I really don't, because I don't know what they are. So how could I possibly care about them in the least? But I do care what you signal to the world. And this is where this idea of authenticity gets really problematic, right? Because people are like, authenticity is a problem. It's like, well, yes, but people don't want what's authentic, actually. What they want is the ideal. And they want the ideal to be exemplified, because an imperfect person exemplifying an ideal implies a bunch of sacrifices on their part, right? So, for example, and you will know this well, many of the topics that I talk about on my live streams or on other people's live streams or on my videos, when I discuss them with people on my Discord server, there are a lot of words that would not be allowed on YouTube being used to describe exactly the same thing. Because when I get fired up and passionate around my friends, I can be me, right? And when I'm me, I am way more hyperbolic than I am when I'm on video. And so, yeah. And so this is restraint and constraint that I'm enacting here, right? So that I can deliver content to a wider audience that won't get turned off. And then you can go, yeah, but if you did that on Rumble, Mark, you get twice as many viewers. I have no doubt. I have zero doubts that that would happen. I am quite capable of going into entertainment mode entirely and not necessarily swearing or anything, although that would be fun. And actually becoming more entertaining. I could do that. That I could. I have made a conscious decision to keep the entertainment value constrained to a certain type of entertainment in a certain way, because a lot of what I do on my channel is filter. So if you don't get my material, that's totally fine. No hard feelings. Go get your material elsewhere. I won't even notice because I actually can't tell who views my material and doesn't find it appealing. Like you can tell.
Your time and energy is valuable. If it's not productive here, then find a place where it is productive.
Where it is productive, exactly. Well said. Right, because my message isn't for everybody. It's for certain types of people, and I'm filtering for those people, like everyone else is, because you have to. You can't include everybody. That doesn't even make any sense. Nick Fuentes is never going to get my attention as somebody I watch on a regular basis. In fact, I don't think I've ever watched any video all the way through with Nick Fuentes in it. Right? So that's that just is what it is, and I'm okay with that. I don't need to understand his views that clearly to know what's going on, because I have superior sense making tools. Thank you very much. See every video I've ever made, at least all the recorded ones. Although the Friday live streams are quite good too. At least listen to all the monologues. I think that's where people get confused. They get confused about polite society and what people want in polite society versus what people want in person, right? Or from a personal connection. So you and I have a personal connection. We met in Ireland at Adam's wedding, which was wonderful. Adam, also videos with Adam, history, excellent. We got to do one more, and I'm feeling slightly betrayed by the Irish. Hopefully he'll find time to do it. You've got a very small window here. When people get married, they get busy. It's not good. So I gotta hook him for one last video before he vanishes for years. But the way we talk on the Discord server is not the way we talk here. And that's because there's an expectation of polite society and what we're signaling to people and how people might see us that don't know us, or worse yet, people that do know us. Like suddenly, what? Those are your views? You don't hate Viktor Orban and want Trump to kidnap him? Because if you listen real carefully, this is one of the things that people miss a lot. And look, no shade, man. I understand people told you can understand things that you can't understand. If you were listening carefully enough, it wasn't too long ago that there were dictators in European countries that people were calling for somebody to come in and take out. And those very same people, in some cases, like actual same physical people, are now saying, how dare Trump go to Venezuela and take the leader of another country away? And I'm like, dude, a couple years ago, you were calling for these other dictators in countries closer to you to be taken out in exactly the same way. You're a hypocrite, right?
Well, and even in my situation, in being in Budapest, I haven't said anything about whether I like or dislike Orban at all, actually. And there's things about him that I really don't like, and it's things that people will not have heard about outside of Hungary. For example,
it's a dog whistle. Where you're living is coded language, whether or not you like. Right. It's all these extra connections people are making to try to make sense of the world, and they ain't got the skills, right? They ain't got the chops. They're not the guy. You're not the guy to understand that. And because you're not, and you're trying to do something that is beyond your capacity, it might not be beyond your ultimate skill level in other circumstances. In other words, if you weren't paying attention to all the other things you need to pay attention to live, right? Let's suppose you were a wealthy diplomat. You might very well be able to do the trick of differentiating. Oh, well, just because somebody lives in Budapest doesn't mean they think Orban's great. And, but there are lots of people that they're cognitively overloaded. I have a video on that. And so they can't see their way through to understanding the world in what people call it nuanced, but I would call it detailed way. And they're just trying to make sense of what they see.
Yeah, and another thing with this overload of information that people are having, but also an overload of sense making, of trying to do too much sense making because there's too much to organize. So you're doing too much sense making, is that you start making conspiracy theories and you start inferring too much stuff. And that also puts you in skepticism because you're just stuck in making sense of new stuff all the time. So you don't really trust like an established narrative at all because you see something that's given to you and you sort of equalize new information and old information, and you like what you see and what other people tell you, and all of these kind of little important distinctions break down, and you're just really overwhelmed, and you don't trust anything, and you're skeptical, and you're sense making all the time. And this shows up in how many people in Europe um, are surprised by Trump, because uh, Trump, as you've pointed out, Mark, he really does what he says, and you don't have to do much sense making about him because you can just trust him in a way.
Yeah. You just listen to him.
He may not be your friend, but he will also maybe tell you that. So
Yeah.
it's all fine. And
Yeah.
for example, with the Maduro thing in Venezuela, he was talking about it a while back,
Yeah.
right? It's not a new
We've
thing.
talked about it before.
And you can look up online how in November Maduro was saying that yeah, he'll step down if they give him a couple million to keep. Like, this is not a new thing at all whatsoever. And other things, it's all being communicated quite clearly. It's not a surprise really, but people who
Yeah.
can't trust that, who can't trust what other people say, and are now being very skeptical about it and everything, then you just don't, and you look for other reasons, and you
Mm.
make some sort of all sorts of
Yeah.
very complicated geopolitical analyses to explain why 10 years in the future the poles of power will shift and everything.
Yeah. 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 The new government utopia will descend from the ideology of possession, or I don't know what words they're going to put together next that don't make any sense. But I'm sure they'll come up with something that I can't predict. Uh, so many people who are so single digit IQ talking about these things on those particular topics. And yeah, and a lot of it is this confusion, and I think it sort of points to this sort of phenomenon I've been trying to, we'll say, come up with a reasonable name for. But in the age of gnosis, where you've got these propositions representing knowledge and knowledge representing the highest value, and people scrambling to own that knowledge, to have it, right, to possess that knowledge. We all believe in possession, right? We believe we should possess things like land and and knowledge, which is not something you can possess, by the way. Um, I think what ends up happening is we're preferring the image in our head, in our imagination, in our imaginal realm, is what Dr. Vervaeke calls it, right? Over the observation of what's happening in front of us. And that leads us into this conspiracy language. And you're right, the skepticism is, do I prefer how I think Trump thinks, or do I prefer what Trump tells me and does? Because those are almost the same thing at some level. I mean, his expression may be a little flowery, right? I'm going to build the highest wall, the longest wall, the tallest wall that's ever walled in the history of walls. No, the problem with that is I talk like that all the time, so I absolutely love it because I'm just like, Trump and me are the same. Like, this is exactly how I talk about everything all the time. Like somebody will drop something and I'll be like, you know, you can't drop that. You're going to destroy the whole world because I talk like that. Because I like to be fun and funny, and because people get really upset over small things, and so if you blow them up into actual world ending things, or like, oh my goodness, you dropped a knife on the floor, and now we're gonna have 10 times the dishes all week because superstition. It actually brings down their anxiety about having dropped something on the, because people are imperfect, and when they cast everything in your imagination, it turns out is perfect. I don't know why. It's weird random fact of the world. And then when they're stuck in their imagination, they expect the world to be perfect. They don't realize any narrative you're given can be easily disproven with a certain set of details. There's some detail that you can bring to bear on some event that makes that event look like it might be false or puts it into question, right? It causes that skeptical cynicism. See my video of Socrates, that skeptical cynicism. And then the next thing you know, you're looking for authenticity, because authenticity is going to solve your skepticism or something, even though the problem is you're stuck in your head. and you're not just preferring the observation that Trump said he was going to do this to Maduro. Maduro said he'd step down if you just gave him a couple $1,000,000. Like this is not a surprise. Like this really happened very starkly. With back when CNN ruled the airwaves a very long time ago. We had a guy named Edward Snowden, right? Everybody knows who Snowden is now. And one of the things that Snowden did, and I used to watch news very closely back then. I was doing my work while watching, all three news stations at the same time because I'm a crazy person and I could get away with that. And Snowden, as it was reported on CNN, exposed the fact that the U.S. government was spying on its own citizens, and I was like, CNN, you guys reported this 2 years before this. It's the exact same report. So Snowden, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in his paperwork that never made the news, and that's all bad and makes him the bad guy because he's the bad guy, by the way. Unlike Julian Assange, who actually is a good guy, there's a difference. Do you know what it is? Everybody should figure it out, right? Snowden that wasn't a revelation. Like everybody already knew this. It had already been in the news cycle 2 years before. Of course, everybody forgot. This is why you can't sense make on your own. You probably have a terrible memory, like most people do. And you don't write things down, like most people don't write things down. And so you totally forgot. And then Snowden gets seen as this hero for revealing this information that was reported on CNN 2 years prior to him doing what he did. I don't know, man. Like, what's going on in the world? But the world's been that bad all along. So you can bring these little facts to bear on this thing, and suddenly it doesn't look the same. And then who do you believe? Do you believe that Snowden's the good guy and Assange is a good guy? Or do you believe that they're both bad guys? Or do you believe, as is correct by the facts on the ground that we can verify, that Assange is a good guy and Snowden was never a good guy? This is very easy. Like if you do a job, you've made a bunch of contracts. Also, you probably signed some because you're a government contractor. I was a government contractor. I know how this works with the feds. That you violated. Assange has never signed a contract for handling information that he violated. See, that one fact alone proves the differentiation. There are other differentiating factors, like Snowden didn't have good anything, right?
This framing of good guy, bad guy is largely, I think, unfamiliar in Europe. Actually, in Europe, it's mostly friend enemy, which says a lot. Yeah. Generally,
it's all relativistic.
Well, generally, yeah, it's pretty much friend, enemy, and good guy, bad guy gets framed in terms of the law. I was like like some sort. Well, but that's nowadays. It's like this person was, part of the French Revolution, and he didn't kill anyone, therefore he's a good guy, for example. Or like, yes, he was for the people. He was a socialist revolutionary, but he was a pacifist. Or he was a socialist revolutionary, but he died, so he's a good guy. Maybe some people would say that, for example. Like the only problem with socialism is that it killed people.
That's fascinating. That explains a lot. I actually saw that. I've talked about this before in one of my live streams recently. There's this whole phenomena around the BBC, right? And they took some January 6th footage, and then the way it was reported in the US, and I'm not joking, everybody who reported it this way in the US should actually be arrested and thrown in prison tomorrow. They said the BBC misquoted Trump. Okay. I know what a misquote is. And a misquote is not taking a video and editing it and then presenting it as a factual representation of what happened on that day. That is not a misquote. Misquoting can happen by accident. This was not an accident. This was an on purpose. And then I find out while this is going on that, in fact, Martin Bashir, famous BBC presenter who got the first ever interview with Princess Diana, which was his first interview ever, which should have been sufficiently suspicious to tell people something was up, got that interview by forging documents that didn't exist. They weren't copies of existing documents. They were forgeries of fraudulent information that was never real. And that he did that trick to many, many people to get interviews so that he could forward his own career. And then the discussion that I saw, which happened on the Heretics channel, Andrew Gold, um, uh, they're talking about this. He's talking with the author of this book that just came out recently, I guess. And their discussion was around, is it okay to forge a 20-pound note? And like, it was a very long discussion for something that takes 2 seconds. Forgery is wrong. It doesn't take, like, it takes zero time. Forgery, bad. This is not hard. There are no good forgeries. That doesn't exist. Maybe in terms of quality of forgery, wow, this is really well forged badness. Okay, but it's still bad, right? And their conclusion was it's okay to, and this is the funniest thing, because really there's two errors here. It's okay to ask somebody to forge me a 20-pound note if I never use it, because now you're letting the forger off the hook and yourself off the hook, right? Because that would be a legal thing. That wouldn't have anything to do with the principles involved. And then that's when I realized these two gentlemen, they don't understand what a principle is. Like, they're unprincipled individuals, which is like, I think we discount that. Like, what if we just live in a world of such human diversity that there's a bunch of people who are incapable of thinking at the level of principle? Because I can tell you for sure that's true, but whatever, like, I can show you all kinds of examples, right? And that's why when the left, who got left by the left in the United States, the Tim Pools of the world, the Brett Weinsteins, those people, Benjamin Boyce, all those wonderful people, uh, they get horribly confused when they try to hold the left's feet to the fire. Well, you said that, anybody that did this should go to jail, but then when you guys do it, you don't want to go to jail, right? You make excuses. Well, of course, because those people are unprincipled. Technically, that's what that means. So they're not capable of thinking in terms of principles and then applying them, and that's a problem. Like, what do we do about that?
Yeah, and I think this is something that I'm making my way out of this confusion. So I can just give some examples of being unprincipled or something just because you have this friend, enemy, or
Mm,
countryman,
yeah.
non-countryman distinction. Is that, for
Mm,
example, in Georgia, they're very proud of Stalin because Stalin was Georgian and he became the leader of the USSR, for example.
yeah.
Or you have in Australia, Australians are quite proud of this guy called Ned Kelly, who was a famous highwayman, and he built himself a suit of armor with like some scrap metal or something, and he was a bandit and a robber, and he killed a bunch of guys, and he had a very big standoff with the police, and he killed some of them, and he died in the end. And they're very proud of him because he's a ruthless and like survivalist and stood for himself and sort of took care of himself like a bit of an individualist. And also, yeah, you just have unprincipled loyalty to you know um, other kinds of kings and monarchs and revolutionaries in lots of Europe. In lots of Europe, there's
Yeah.
many places where there's an old church, and then there's like a freedom square, which is dedicated to the socialist revolution of this and that time, and where like lots of people were killed. And then next to that, they have a monument to soldiers in a war. And then that's a bit more complicated because like, do you honor soldiers who died in a bad cause? That's a
Right.
bit tricky.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's that inability to tell good from bad that is what we're primarily suffering from. I mean, nobody wants to talk about it, or maybe no one's able to talk about it because they're trying to use a scientific frame where you can't adjudicate good and bad with science. It doesn't work. Science doesn't have the tools. But they want that level of certainty because science is high certainty, right? It's a very high certainty thing. If you do this experiment, you're going to get these results every time, right? There's a cost for that, which is over explaining what you're doing, and also, there's always unstated things like, oh, if you don't do this at sea level, it won't work that way at all, right? Like, there's all these little gotchas in the science that no one talks about. And then we don't have that for these sorts of things, like what's good and what's bad. Is it okay? But then, being unprincipled is more like also not being able to apply the law. So it turns out, I didn't know this, but in this conversation, according to these Brits, and they're both Brits, so I believe them. I believe they're both English, in fact. Uh, fraud has no statute of limitations. And so they've got emails from the BBC not only saying that they knew about the fraud, but that Martin Bashir did in fact commit the fraud, and that the person who did the fraudulent document actually admitted to doing it and had reported it. Now, you can say whatever you want about the BBC higher ups and whether or not they should be immediately imprisoned and have all their assets seized, because that should happen. But Martin Bashir's guilty. Why don't you take him to jail like immediately, since he's guilty of a crime with no statute of limitations and the evidence is overwhelming? Like, everyone's admitted that this happened. You don't even technically need a trial. You need a sentencing trial, but you don't need a guilt or innocence trial. Like, why? But we're living in this world where even the principles of the law are not being upheld or even considered. They didn't even consider it. I'm like, okay, guys. I mean, they discussed it. I'm like, this is a weird. So you just discussed the fact openly that forgery has no statute of limitations. And you didn't move to the next step of Martin Bashir should be in jail. You couldn't do that part. Like, why? Like, you're not following through to get to the principle. And I think that they're not capable of it, which is very scary situation where you have people giving high-level social commentary, commenting. I mean, the guy's book is about whether or not, and his thesis is these people met Martin Bashir and basically they died. And he thinks that's Martin Bashir's fault. And actually the case he made just in that one, I think it was an hour-long video on heretics, it sounded right to me. Let me put it that way. It sounded like his thesis is exactly correct. 0% wrong. But they're not, like, there's no outcome from that. It's just like information hanging in the middle of nowhere that no one's doing anything about, and no one seems eager to do anything about. And I'm just like, what are we doing? Why are we exposing information that we're not going to participate in and take action on? Because that's part of the flood of information. There's so much information, and then no one's acting on that information. What good is this? I mean, that's making the world worse, not better.
Yeah, they really do put people in positions when and then they need to.
You're cutting out a bit. I can't hear. Your microphone takes a
Sorry,
little while. There we go. Try that.
Sorry, yeah. It comes in and out. I was just saying that you need action, and there's positions where action is needed. And if people in those positions aren't acting, then they should be removed. But that's an action in itself, so it's not going to happen. So
right. Well,
that's
the who's going to step up and do things. And I think the thing that people get confused about with Trump is that when you're trapped in your head and you're making all these predictions in your imagination, which is still perfect, by the way, you get used to making predictions based on a perfect imagination. And then the thing that throws you off is when people take an action in the world, because an action in the world is not in your imagination because it hasn't happened yet. And so the only actions that you might want to project are basically random, because ultimately you don't know what people are going to do until they do it. And there are some notable and important exceptions to that, but they're exceptions and they're rare. And so the problem is like trying to predict what will Trump do next, right? Boils down to, as you pointed out earlier, the way to know what Trump will do next is just to listen to what he says. And the odds that he'll do that are actually higher than any predictive engine you could come up with, because he generally does what he says. And that, when I was growing up, that was a valuable thing, right? That was a really valuable thing, was, does this person do what they say and say what they do, right? Like, will they cop to things after they do them too, right?
You should
What? You're not coming through again.
You should aspire to be somebody who does what they say and says what they do.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think that is valued anymore. What's valued seems to be what's in people's heads and how much sense it makes. Like, how coherent does the story that someone's telling you about something sound? And then they don't realize it's the story, because after all, it's just facts on the ground. And facts on the ground somehow aren't a story. And I'm like, well, the facts on the ground aren't a story, but when you're relating them together, now you're telling a story. And if you don't have the capacity, and maybe most people don't have the capacity to tell a good story from a bad story, now you have a problem, because enchantment is inevitable. And again, my video about that's going to come out at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, actually, from my European friends. That may only be you, Gustavs, who's watching them all at 3 a.m. But according to the analytics, that's what's going on. So we're gonna try and experiment, but it'll be available for everybody. This is recorded video, so you're not missing anything if you catch it at 7 a.m. Eastern time or whatever. So I think that people are very confused by that. They don't really understand. No, you're being told a story. There's no such thing as a historical narrative that's factual. It's like they're all factual. Like, and sometimes they conflict because people don't understand that lots of things are happening all at once and you can't see most of them. And so you have to pick something like, well, why did the Pope call for a crusade? Was it because Byzantium needed help, right? Or was it because the king in the north of France was nervous about the knights in the south of France gaining too much power and overthrowing him? Or was it a conspiracy by the Medici family to start banking, right, and be the bankers of the world? These all happened, like which is the driving force, which is turns out that there's more than one driving force. But because we're single persons, we have to pick one. Like we can't get into every detail of any historical situation, you know. And you can pick anything and play that game. And I think that when we don't have a unifying force that we all just agree is an authority, and then treat as an authority, despite their imperfections. Because I don't know if you know this, Gustavs. Are you sitting down? I hope everybody else is sitting down. People aren't perfect, man. And so you can vote Trump into office all you want, and he's not going to do everything you think is the right answer. And that may be because you were wrong about the right answer too, by the way. You don't know, because the perspective of the president is not my perspective ever, until and unless I'm president, which I don't anticipate ever happening and would not want that job for all the money in the world. Thank you very much. So I think people get confused because they're so busy living in their heads. They're so busy putting together, we'll call them perfect narratives about how things do unfold, how things did unfold, and how things should unfold, that they're just not accepting the observation of the imperfect world that we're all stuck in.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of sort of envy or jealousy going around, because people are figuring things out for themselves, and for most people, what they want is bread and circuses, and they gravitate towards that, and then that becomes the majority frame in the world, and then you get kind of like socialisms and jealousies about other people, and yeah, I don't know if it makes sense. Does it?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, you're jealous that the world inside your head is not the world you're living in outside your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that makes you resentful. You're like, well, I'm smarter than Elon Musk, and therefore I should have all the money, even though intelligence doesn't correlate with income or wealth at all, ever. I don't know what to tell you. And interestingly, you probably heard this before because I've pointed it out before. Interestingly, in the U.S., you have much more economic mobility, but in Europe, there are plenty of families that have had the majority wealth in a particular country for 400 years. Like, that's not unusual. Like, how does wealth work in Europe? Oh, did your family have some or not? Because if your family was wealthy, you're probably going to be able to keep that wealth. And that's actually done through political means or governmental means, right? It's the governance that keeps that going. And yeah, I mean, I could always argue, I don't know if I would ever argue this, that's a better system in some sense, because once you grow up in money, the idea that you could hold on to it better is more palatable. And that actually has worked in the U.S. I mean, Rockefeller, famously, probably the wealthiest man that has lived for at least 500 years. His family still, like, they maintain their capital more than 3 generations. It's super unusual. That almost never happens, right? Um, but the Mayflower kids, the daughters of the American Revolution over here in New England, or well, up in New England, not New England anymore. They've kept all their money too, but they were old Europe money families to begin with when they got here, and so that line of wealth has actually continued. Maybe not unbroken. I don't check on the Cabots on a regular basis. Actually, the Cabots are gone, but I don't check on all those families. For a while, they ran the bank that controlled the most money in the United States, which was more money than the federal debt, and that was from Boston, not New York. So I'm just saying, and so it's not clear to me whether or not that familial money perpetuation system is better than the high churn. I mean, there are obviously, like, I'm an American. I love what we do and what we've done. There's obviously advantages to what we do, right? We're able to create things very quickly and innovate at a ridiculous historical pace. I don't know if that's a good thing. I mean, yay, I have the internet, and also, oh my goodness, have you seen what's on the internet? Right? Like, no wonder why society's falling apart. And so I'm always stuck in that
Well,
plus and
well,
minus.
part of the vigor of the US is definitely its youth relative to Europe, because
Yeah.
it's not so stuck in its ways, and there's plenty
Right.
of fresh soil. But it's not just there's plenty of fresh soil, and the fishes are still in the water, and the soil is still fertile, and it's not just that. It's also that the US is spiritually younger, and it's not so stuck in
Mm.
its ways because there's not so many ways yet to be stuck in, and that means you're not breaking rules, you're just doing something a little bit different. Whereas in Europe, the path is much narrower for each person. You
Mm.
kind of know where you end up, from where you start out. In the US, that isn't the case. You can do all sorts of interesting things. You can move around. You can just build something if you like, and it seems like you can make enough money as well to do all sorts of interesting things. Um,
Yeah.
and you can change alliances and all those, like, you can get you can start a family from somebody with a very different sort of like ethnic background that would have been unimaginable, I don't know, 200 years ago. Like, it just
Mm.
wouldn't happen, right? So,
Right.
like,
Right.
marrying somebody from Africa, in the US, totally normal. Like, it happens a lot. In Europe, it's a bit weird. Some places, like, you still wouldn't do that. Even marrying somebody from like a different country is like, mm,
Mm.
yeah, in parts of Europe it's fine. In other places, it kind of creates chaos. It mixes categories a bit too much. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, I'm not making a racism thing or anything. It's just mixing categories. In the US can do that just fine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true too. There's a lot of little differences that add up to a lot of big differences that we kind of ignore between the continent of Europe and North America, roughly speaking, although it's really the United States. And we went over, Adam and I went over this in the Frontier of Ideas video. There's a lot of copying going on, poorly, because I don't think that either side sees the other clearly at all. And so the things we do that we think are, quote, European, which doesn't really make any sense to talk that way, but that's one of the things we don't see clearly. We just see Europe as one big blob over here. Um, are wrong. Like, that's not even the way any of the countries in Europe are in some cases. Like, there's no countries in Europe that are that way. To your point, like, they don't do these mixed ethnicity marriages quite so much. Like, that's really not a thing that is, we'll say, widely tolerated. And I think the main confusion in that comes from where people are looking. And people right now are looking at the people in the upper classes, in the more elite classes, and assuming that that's the way the world should be. And I'm like, but they have money, and they have, much much better ways of interacting, right? Like I know people that, they get upset because they had to jump on a plane and fly to see somebody unexpectedly, and I'm like, I can't do that. Like I don't have the money to just jump on a plane, right? And yeah, I mean, Jan God, it depends if your country colonized parts of the world. Jan God insists there are European countries where interracial couples are not as taboo. Well, maybe not as taboo. That's always true because of former colonies. I don't think that's as true as you think it is, Jan God. How many times have you been
Well,
to
it's
Europe?
and it's probably certain colonies, not other certain colonies.
Right, right. It becomes acceptable at a very slow rate over there compared to here. And I think most of the countries over there are experiencing, we'll say, the ups and downs of that on both sides, right? So
It's you can look at this quite well through the Mathieu Peugeot framework of the house, kind of the walls being established and this sort of thing, about the straight lines being drawn by the person as the sort of carving out of the world into like a stable and safe place. And a country is a certain kind of house, right? It has borders, it has
yeah.
a center, and these things. And the roads in Europe, many places are hundreds and hundreds of years old. They've just put
Mm.
on a new thing, like they've added a bit of structure to it and maybe some kind of foundation or something. But the roads are pretty much in the same places as they were when the Romans came. So
Right.
they've aged so long and they're so permanent. They're really fundamental, and you can't just build a new road because the old roads are good enough and they're actually pretty good usually, and the new ones would just upset things and they would carve through somebody's house. You just don't have the space to do that. In the US, you can, I think. Like
Oh
people
yeah.
people put up toll roads and stuff like that, from what I hear. All kinds of places.
Oh, people
Start
build
new
roads
new
all over the
towns.
place. But there's space everywhere. There's space. So I went to I own land in 2 counties. So, Sarah wanted to get seeds from the seed library. I was like, "There's a seed library in Richland County." And we don't technically live in Richland County, but I pay taxes in Richland County, so I can go to the library there. But we have to go down and get library cards. Well, fortunately, there's a branch of the Richland County Library, 'cause Richland County's freaking enormous, right down the street. It's 5 miles away. It's right in back of the mall, oddly enough. The last mall that's open in Columbia, I think. Um, and so we go there, and first of all, it's 2 buildings, enormous buildings. They're like 4 stories high, connected by a walkway. And they're behind the mall. So there's this mall with all these parking lots and stores and buildings. It's cool. It's an outdoor mall. And then behind that is like open field, except for this ginormous building, right? Or it's really 2 buildings, but it's like 4 stories high. There's only 2 stories in the building. I mean, this is the most wasted space I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, what is going on here? The library is not much bigger than the tiny library in Kershaw County down the street from us, which is a converted house, right? So there's actually, you could fit all the stuff from this library, it would be tight, into a converted house. And they have this enormous 2-story building, and not even all of it, just the front, which is even funnier to me, that they've housed this in because there's just tons of space out here and you can afford to do
Yeah,
that.
well, and in a couple hundred years, maybe people will curse whoever built that house in that way, and they will honor that house because it's so old, and it'll be like the little old towns in Europe, maybe,
Yeah.
where
Who knows?
somebody had the church in the front, and then now people are super annoyed because with their cars they can't get through the street anymore. Stuff like that.
Right.
With age, certain things and maturation, certain things kind of change, and you probably have elements of that in the older towns.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
For sure. We have this weird schizophrenia, right? Like people are like, oh, well, this is the oldest house in Boston. And it just went up for sale recently, I guess. It is so out of place because it's just in the middle of this modern city, right? Like, what is going on here with all these big buildings and crazy things? And then you've got this weird dichotomy. So back in the 90s, there's a little town on the South Shore, and what happened was they were revitalizing the rail system. down there. It's Boston has a relatively nice rail system. It's a small city, but got a reasonably good rails. This is the first subway system, working long-term subway system in the world, Boston, Massachusetts. So they basically got into a fight over what they were going to do about that. And the state government was ridiculous. They're like, you know what? We'll build a tunnel over the track so you don't have to see the train in the middle of town. And they were like, no, this town is historic. We can't ruin the history of the town. And of course, Gustavs, what is the history of the town? It's entirely rail based. That town didn't exist before rail. So it was like, your town center is built around the rail, guys. That argument's not going to work. But no one living there knew that, or at least, the people that were complaining the loudest didn't know that. And so they tried that argument. So they have this schizophrenic relationship in the US with age and things like that. It's sort of fascinating how that pans out. It as opposed to Europe, which I think part of the problem is Europe is full, and the United States is nowhere near full. Like, there's so much habitable land, and there's a lot of places to go. I think that's part of the problem is, unless we start looking at geopolitics, where we do fundamentally disagree because ultimately we're from different immigrant groups, we're totally united as Americans. And now that the identity crisis is here, mostly I would say, again, due to the intimacy crisis, it's a real problem. Like, you end up with an issue that doesn't need to be there. Like, when we're all Americans, it's fine. I mean, my grandfather didn't want any of his kids to speak French Canadian at all. I don't think any of them know any French. It's like, my grandfather spoke French. He used to sing in French. Right? My grandmother loved French, but she loved French, so she was a Francophile for sure. But no, none of the kids, nope, not spoken in the house normally. I mean, the parents used it to talk so the kids wouldn't know what they were saying, but like, if I go to Maine, Biddeford area where my family's from, Saco and Biddeford, the Twin Cities, there's a little bit of French Canadian slang and my aunt, my uncle, ma tante, right? And things like that. Like, I picked up some of that, but I don't speak any French. So we've kind of separated from our heritage in that way to be Americans. Like, we sacrificed the French Canadian nature of the family to some extent, to be this uniquely American thing. And I don't, do you have that in Europe where somebody will move to Budapest and want to be Hungarian? That's not your goal, I hope.
Actually, it's ridiculous that you even suggest that. It's so impossible. Like, people would
Good.
politely, I don't know, like, people wouldn't even laugh at me if I said that, or I want to become Hungarian. It would just be, they would think I'm a fool or something, because it's just not the way it works. I'm Latvian, and I always will be, pretty much.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think there was a bunch of that kind of shifting happening after the Second World War,
Mm.
because a lot of people got put in between different countries, and especially with people from Germany and like Poland and maybe the Netherlands, and there's the part of Alsace-Lorraine in France, right, which got
Yeah.
transferred between Germany and France. Those sorts of areas, there is a bit of that kind of moving around, but also those other countries which are a bit more slippery about those categories, especially in the border regions. But these sorts of questions of, especially between the Belarusians, Russians, Ukrainians, that's kind of a big deal. It's like a bit tricky. Um,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
a mess.
people kind of sacrificing a lot to move to places, you mostly see that nowadays, I would say, with people moving to Germany or moving to the UK for economic reasons, from Latvia, for example. That's a big
Mm.
thing. But also, people aren't really that quick to abandon where they're from. They aren't, and they tend to get involved in the communities, maybe, or at least like visit home, send money back. But moving the whole family, no, not really, never. I don't think
What's
I've heard of it.
Yeah, that must be a real problem post Napoleon, because he's really the first one to decide that the way the world works is you can just draw lines on a map, install some form of governance and call it a country. I really don't think that sense happened before that. Before that, it was all conquest and kings, and like there's none of that. And you rightly argue that the United States actually caused that problem, or the existence of America and the way it came to be caused that problem. Fair enough. That's rather likely, but it must be post Napoleon that people are confused. Like, there's no such country as Italy. Like, what are we doing? Like, that's ridiculous. That whole idea that Italy exists to me is because Southern Italy and Northern Italy have basically they don't even eat the same food. Like, so what are we talking about?
Oh, I just recently I met a lovely lady. She's from Spain. She grew up in Spain. She's never lived outside Spain. But she has a German surname, sort of a German type surname.
Hmm.
And yeah, and their family to some like she's never spoken German. She speaks Spanish. But yeah, like she's aware that she has German history, and that kind of pulls her a lot. And she doesn't look German at all, at all. She looks perfectly Iberian. Interesting, like kind of situations like that come up where people, even from your surname, they can kind of tell, yeah, this is a person from here, this is from there.
So are people in Europe, do they identify with their, we'll say, ancient heritage, say the medieval map rather than the modern map? I mean, is that a thing? Because that's I've seen a little bit of that where people have
Yeah,
said like,
definitely, 100%, 100%. Yep,
yeah, so
I do.
they're not going off today's map. They're going off, whatever sense they had probably from some medieval map back, so pre-Napoleonic for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting the way that we wouldn't understand that because we don't have that condition in the US. The closest we have is what ethnicity are you? And they did that stupid 23andMe nonsense and confused everybody, which doesn't help at all, especially when that test isn't anywhere near as accurate as they claim. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, the idea of identifying yourself not from the country that's drawn on the map today is interesting, and so that's sort of just built into the culture down there, where it's sort of like tolerated, like, and that makes sense, right? Because um, effectively, what you end up with is you end up with the same structure from the bottom level as you had under the medieval feudal system, which is, well, yeah, we're under this king right now because he conquered this other king, right, or took over this part of the kingdom, or maybe they swapped land or whatever. But actually, we're this people because we're part of this kingdom, so it doesn't matter. If people really don't understand, like you need to understand the Holy Roman Emperor and how many titles he had, and then why that matters, and then the fact that Napoleon does away with all that, right? He does away with all the ritualistic and important way interactions that need to happen to have an empire, and he just declares himself emperor, which causes an intimacy crisis, right? He's not any particular close thing to any of the places that he claims to be ruling over, because he's just the emperor. Whereas the Holy Roman Emperor had like well over 100 titles. It might have been over 200 titles, right? A title for every region over which he had dominion. And Napoleon just flattens all that, like actually flattens it. You want flat world? Napoleon flattens the world. Maybe he's not the first, but he's certainly the worst. And then people end up, maybe even unconsciously mimicking that pattern. But the people at the bottom, they're unsophisticated and they know where they came from, and they don't look at your maps or care about them, right? And so they just identify the way they identified back in the medieval times, like we're this. And then it only becomes an issue when you have this enforced sort of system where the virtues and values of the culture in charge, uh, take over and force people to be thrown out of Bosnia, and things like that, right? Like you mentioned earlier, like people are just moved, um, and you have incidents around what happened after the second act of the Great War, where the Jews try to quote go back home, and they're like, well, this really wasn't ever your home, and so we took your house and we're not giving it back. It's like, what? And so yeah, there's all that sort of thing that happened, in a bunch of places. And of course, again, in the United States, we can't really appreciate that because we don't nothing like that ever, like, we weren't here in medieval times. There's no medieval whatever structure to refer to, in essence. There's no contrast.
Yeah, so with again the European self-conception, it can be interesting where you can consider two different people sort of coming from the same root, but being split apart by different kings, right? So you have, I don't know, the Norwegians and the Swedish are quite similar. Yes, and the history of division goes back a long way, but really they're quite similar. And they can talk about how they had different kings and how that sort of over time has diverged. So they've kind of diverged over time. Or for example, I don't know, Portugal and Spain, or different parts of France maybe, or where there's a lot of difference, a lot of diversity. And then again, you can also have like very different people kind of brought together under the same king. So you can have Greece really, or Italy, and those also create dynamics. But I think there is this understanding that way back in the day there there were ethnic tribes really that kind of each had their language, and they had their leader, their chieftain, their king, and at some point things evolved and we were brought into history. But there's this understanding that there is a prehistory from before history. Yeah. So where did all the European people come from? And there's this idea of coming from the steppe, or them living in the forests of Germany or something. There's this understanding of how, well, history really comes with Christianity in Europe. So it's kind of
Mm.
this understanding of there's a pre-Christian past, and then we were brought into the light of Christianity that is persistent and gives us history and these things. But yeah,
Yeah, well, there's this whole thing. I was always laughing at people about this, but they're like, "Well, you just Christ figure anyway. Why does he figure in anything?" I'm like, "Have you heard of AD versus BC? Do you know what that means?" Like, are you sure? Are you sure this is insignificant? Because it seems like it changed the world because we talk about it like that. And, maybe again, you could always argue, although I don't know how stupid you'd have to be to try, and you'd get beaten pretty quickly. You could always argue that it's arbitrary and that you could have picked some other figure and divided the timeline that way, but of course it wouldn't work almost immediately. But I would be happy to beat somebody about the history about that pretty handily because I do like easy games. I love to win, so don't do that. It'll just make me happy, and you'll look bad. But feel free to try if you really want to make me happy and look bad at the same time. Yeah, I mean it's not arbitrary, right? Some some upgrade of the concept of civilization occurred at that moment, and maybe not due to that thing, we'll say, right? But at that moment or around that moment. And that's the most salient moment to pick. And so you pick that moment and you divide the timeline, the actual historical timeline, by that event. And you uh, count down on one side and up on the other, right? So this is interesting too, right? You change the whole way you're doing the measure, which is utterly fascinating. Um, and so there's a sense in which, because in the past we had a very deep hierarchy, the ethnicities would have been left alone to manage themselves according to their own virtues and values, so long as they don't do anything to disrupt the empire, right? The king would just leave you alone. He might rule over 10 or 12 ethnicities or ethnic regions or whatever, but that doesn't matter because he's not adjudicating that directly according to his values. That's not the way it worked. And it's not that you didn't have the ability to appeal to the king if you couldn't adjudicate it at your level, but you're kind of skipping steps to say you could go directly to the king. No, you couldn't go directly to the king. You had to work it out locally first and then work it out regionally second. And then, maybe there's a layer or two above that before you can get to the king. And people always skip the step and say, well, no, you can just adjudicate with the king. No, that is a lie. Somebody tells you that, they're lying. Almost nobody could do that. There are exceptions, of course, but the average person could not do that. What was that? You were cutting out there for a second.
The U.S. state and federal system with emperor and local guys.
You're still not coming through right. I don't know what you did. Try again.
Hear me now? Now?
Yes.
Are you making a parallel to the U.S. state and federal system?
I wasn't, but you did. Yeah, I mean, I think very much that's and we're confused in the US, right? We think the law is the federal law and we think all laws are federal somehow, and that's part of the Epstein file disappointment that's coming for everybody in 2026. No one's going to get arrested, guys, because no one broke any federal laws, because there aren't federal laws for that on the books. I hate to say, you can just look it up. Like, you don't have to believe me, you can just actually look it up. What is the federal age of consent, right? It doesn't exist. Age of consent is a state by state thing in the United States. Most of the laws that you're subject to are state laws. There's very few federal laws at the end of the day, especially when you start comparing, right? There's local laws besides that. So, like, for example, where I live, there's a law that if you drive a pickup truck and you have anything in the back of your pickup truck, it must be covered. Now, that is a law in my town. It is not a very large town. If you go to another town, that's not true. In fact, I don't think any of the surrounding towns have that regulation or that ordinance. So you're subject to an additional law in my town that doesn't exist in other towns because most laws are local. And they should be, and they should be managed by local people who are more likely to know you or know your circumstances better than Trump, who's sitting in an or your senator or your Congress, your House member, right? Like, it's ridiculous. But we tend to squish things down because, again, we're postmodern. We're told that we can understand these things when that's ridiculous. There are no people that understand these things, not single individuals, right? That's the problem. And so we do all these shortcuts to fit it in our head because we're told that we should and we could and we have to. And then it doesn't work because we're dumb and it's big and we're small. And so, like, it's not an option. And then we get confused and we think releasing the Epstein files is going to result in elites getting arrested. And I'm like, arresting elites is not a good idea. If you pull down the roof over you, you die in the process. Please don't do that. That seems stupid. Also, you might kill me in the process, and I'm rather fond of not dying. So could we please not? But yeah, you're right. In the US in particular, we're very confused. I would have to actually go more thoroughly through the founding documents to understand whether or not the founding fathers understood that, say, hierarchical division. But I would at the same time say it's not deep enough to do what it's trying to do, right? It's not deep enough. It needs to be deeper. And I think feudal Europe had a much deeper hierarchical system, and it worked really well. And it would be interesting to go through and try and figure out when it got squished and how badly, we'll say, if such a thing can be measured. But it's also possible that I'm wrong and that actually we have a perfectly deep system, just as feudal Europe did. I just haven't haven't done the research, so I'm not going to make a claim about that other than I haven't done the research, and I wonder if I don't have an opinion because I don't have the knowledge to have an opinion or the information to have an opinion. Sorry, misusing the word knowledge. I'm like the worst offender of my own problem. I do, however, hello, Manuel. Yes, I ignored you earlier on purpose. I didn't like your comments. The merchant class upset the hierarchy? I don't think so. I actually think that I know where that narrative comes from, and I think it's wrong. I think that what do you think, Gustav? Do you think the merchant class upset the hierarchy or no?
Uh, merchant class. Well, hard to say. Seems there's always been a place for merchants, but
Yeah.
it's kind of complicated. For example, in Poland, merchantry was reserved for the Jews because no honest normal person would do that kind of work. Um,
Right. Right.
and that's a bit confusing because it seems like a pretty good job in some ways, at least nowadays. Uh, looking back,
Mm.
so hard to say exactly what was going on there. But I don't know. When I think of merchant class being very rich, I think of sort of medieval Europe, and there not being that much trade going on. It was sort of like one strip going from like Paris to Venice to the Holy Land and the Silk Road, and sort of Venice getting quite rich. I mean, I don't know like which period of time are we looking at? Are we looking at the late Middle Ages, the early modern time of sort of expansion? And well, I would say that the merchant class exploding was a consequence of the Enlightenment,
Mm.
which tore down tariffs. That was the big thing, is that tariffs got torn down. Uh,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
because they figured out that by lowering tariffs and lowering taxes, people would produce more, and then you would have a higher volume of taxes. So you would have higher economic activity, and potentially also you could actually collect more taxes by lowering the
Right.
percentage of them, which is a bit funny. And it seems like nowadays, in some places, people are kind of for that, in other cases against that. So we can't really decide on that either. But that was a big deal, was that
Right.
people broke down these barriers in between, like the Holy Roman Empire's little cities that had their own special economic zones, and you were only taxed the stuff that you exported from them, and things like that. That got stopped, and I
Mm.
think merchants got very rich off of that change.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a fundamental problem with the merchant class until England, right? And that is that's where things get interesting, right? Young God, I think you're a little confused. This is a different issue. Bankers are not merchants at all. The banker class, which is probably a class that no one ever talks about, that's a different problem. Um, and that's where the Jewish bankers come from. If you look up Yaron Brooks talks from like 2018, 2019 about this, why Europe hates the Jews, roughly speaking. This is an interesting talks he gave. Um, the banking problem is totally different. I don't see a problem until the East India Company, and the East India Company creates a bunch of problems by basically enforcing the first usurpation of kingly rule, uh, you know, through England by instantiating a permanent parliament, which should not exist and needs to be eradicated immediately in all countries unilaterally. Yeah, it's a big
That
problem.
only, but that rise of the super rich trade empire really only happened after the usurpation of the priestly status by the kings, because that's the first thing that happened, is that the kings revolted against the pope, basically,
Yep. Yep.
and made state churches and things like this. Um, that then kind of led to more mercantile interests, and well, you need different classes of people. I mean, maybe the merchant class did. I mean, it definitely did upset a lot of things, but it seems quite late. And you need different people with different interests, really,
Well, it's either
because
yeah, it's either
yeah,
quite late or it's universal, right? Because you can make an argument for Rome and oh shoot, what's the name of that? the port city of Rome that's outside of Rome, right? Because what is it?
Ostia.
Ostia. Yeah, thank you. I don't know why my brain's not working, but still recovering from that cold, I suspect. Yeah, Ostia, right? So, like, the Romans had this, they had a merchant class, and some of the merchant class got in and ruled the Republic for a while, right? Famously. This is not, and so were they a class? If they were a class, is that a problem? Like, if there's been a merchant class since Rome, what are we talking about? Like, I don't understand. What do you mean the rise of the merchant class? When is it exactly that the merchant class rose? So Manuel, I think the idea that the merchant becoming a point of reference is additional to the traditional hierarchy shifted locus of social attention. Maybe, but when? Like, I don't, and how did that happen? Because I don't think so. I think that's a narrative, it's a narrative form, and it's like, it's useful to talk about the merchant class and stuff, but it's a narrative form that you're imposing on history. And like I said earlier, fair enough, you have to impose narrative forms on history. Of course you do. We can't understand things without story, but when you impose uh, that class system, you have to pick a beginning for the rise or a beginning for the shifting of attention or something, and then what the results of that really were. And then, just to reiterate to Young God, like, banking is not the merchant class. The banking class is fundamentally different. And the fact that they have overlap because of things like usury laws, and the fact that there are outcast people who are nomads in the world, and the Jews happen to be one of them, isn't meaningful. It just means that all the odd jobs, the jobs people didn't want to do either for religious purity reasons, which is usury, or to keep the sanctity of their ethnicity, which is trade. I don't want to go away from home. Like, I want to make money here. Enslaving those other people in those industries, which is one way to look at it. Is it a valid way? I don't know. That's a different a difference. So, Yangad, yeah, you said this a number of times. Mark, you can ask for a loan from your neighbor in Europe. Okay, maybe. You don't appreciate the level of corruption in Europe. No, I don't. I don't even care about it. But how are you judging it? Some things are not on paper. Most things are not on paper. But whatever, it doesn't really matter in the end. It does matter in the end. What are you judging the corruption on? So, like, for example, let me talk about India for a second, right? So, talk to my buddies in India, and well, not all, a bunch of the people that I know, more than half from India, are from wealthy families in India, like real wealthy families, not like, oh, upper middle class Indian families. No, like multi-generational wealthy families. And they will tell you flat out, or at least they told me because they trust me and they're awesome. Uh, look, in order to get in and out of the country, like, you got to carry a little bit of Indian money with you and grease some palms. Period. And it may not be a matter of getting in or out, but it may be like, well, I need a visa tomorrow, and you can get that, but you got to throw a few rupees a certain way. Like, you just have to. It's part of the culture. Right? If you go to university, I mean, a bunch of Indians told me this. If you hire anybody from India, make sure they went to one of these two universities, because all the other universities are low standard, and they think it's okay to cheat on a test. Like, they think it's okay, like, actually believe in their hearts and souls that there's that having the book open during the test is a valid test, right? When anybody in the US would tell you, well, we have open book tests and stuff, but no one takes those classes seriously because they're open book. Like, they're not valued, right? The value is less. And so people have different standards. So what I might call corruption, is not is not really corruption, right? It's just a different set of values within the culture. And I think that's the problem, is that, what do you mean by European corruption? And why do you expect there not to be corruption? I don't know of anything that's not corrupt. I mean, I just, maybe I'm naive or something, but also I look around and I see a lot of detail and a lot of things that people miss, and pretty much everything's corrupted. So we live in a fallen world or something, I guess. That's one way to put it. So what do you mean? And how bad is it really? Like how actually bad is it that, say, to get in and out of India, you might have to grease a few palms? Like, I don't know how else it would work. Is the government paying for it or are you paying for it? Because the government's paying for it, you're paying for it. Does it matter if that transaction's direct or indirect? Direct transactions are more efficient. Is that corrupt? I don't know. Like, the guy's got to eat. Hey, he gets a few rupees every time someone goes in and out. The government does too. He's just participating in the same thing, maybe in an inappropriate way. And we could have that discussion. But man, you're going to have to define corruption. Because if corruption is the image in my head of how things should work ideally, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because that's never going to happen anyway. And it's not corrupt. It's called Tuesday, right? Like, and that's the problem. What would you say, Gustavs? Do you see a lot of corruption in the various countries in the continent of Europe?
Not really, no. Actually, I think that it's at least the ones that I've
You're cutting out again. Try one more time.
not really. No,
No.
no,
Okay.
not much corruption. I haven't seen much. People are lazy many places. People are uh, sort of unfriendly, maybe in some places. Things like that. Um, Impolite, perhaps. But I haven't seen much well, I just haven't seen it, I suppose. But I just know there's always a cost to doing business and a
Yeah.
cost to doing things. And if you want a burger, maybe you have to go make it. And yeah, it's like, even if you have all the ingredients in front of you, you still have to use a knife and everything, and like heat some stuff up. Like, there's a cost to doing things, and there is a virtue, I think, in systems being transparent and doing what they say, like having that integrity. That's sure, that's fine, but learning to live in a truly integrated world means you also have to learn to integrate that corruption at the end of the day and to deal with it.
Mm. Yeah, and so more trading the corruption you're familiar with the corruption you're unfamiliar with. And, again, by who and what standard? Because the game that people play, basically on themselves, because you do most of these things to yourselves, other people aren't doing them to you, is they'll say something's corrupt, but then when there's a law they don't like, they don't follow that law. Well, that's you being corrupt. So, like, it's like, what are we talking about here? And again, not that corruption doesn't exist. But also corruption is 100% clear. I mean, like I pointed out with the BBC situation and Martin Bashir, there's no way you can tell me that guy shouldn't be in prison immediately. There's no way. There's no set of facts you can bring to bear. The facts are pretty clear. He's a bad dude. He did bad things. He needs to be punished publicly. I'm sorry. Like, this isn't that hard. When we don't do that, we get extra exemplification, maybe, although maybe only bad exemplification, right? We see people succeeding by doing bad and corrupt things that hurt a lot of people. And then we go, well, that's the way to succeed. Now, whether we do this consciously or unconsciously is kind of irrelevant. I would argue almost all that mimicry is unconscious. But we start to do that. And I think, like, the danger, if you wanted to say somebody like Nick Fuentes, there's a danger to Nick Fuentes, which is probably there's a danger to everything, guys. I don't know what to tell you about that. But if you wanted to make a case for there's an extra danger in letting Nick Fuentes be Nick Fuentes or something, or him being himself publicly or something, the only case you have is that if people copy what he's doing and they don't have the same orientation that he has, they can very quickly and easily spiral into very bad behavior and leading people down a bad path. I think that would be valid. But again, these discussions are ridiculous unless we have a discussion of what polite society is and who gets in or out. But everybody wants to scream free speech and democracy. Well, guess what you have to get rid of? Free speech and democracy. Otherwise, you're not going to have a polite society, and you're not going to have grounds to tell Nick Fuentes not to do what he's doing. Like, those grounds don't exist. Now, I rather believe that Nick Fuentes should be allowed in polite society and a bunch of other people should get kicked out for sure, right? And so we'd have to have that discussion too. It's not whether or not polite society exists, but actually what the boundaries of polite society should be. And the problem for me, and I've said this several times, I'll just say it again. It's also going to be on a very large podcast very soon. I hope probably tomorrow. Fingers crossed. Conservatives are willing to draw imperfect lines and hold to them knowing they're imperfect. Moderates are willing to admit to boundaries, but they can't agree on what those boundaries should be. And leftists will not agree to boundaries. They'll tell you they agree to boundaries. They'll draw boundaries and move them tomorrow, though. So they don't believe in boundaries. They believe in their whim. They're hedonists, basically. That's the way to understand this. It's 3 buckets, not 2. And I'm not so sure, I'm not sure that I could say for certain that, even Tim Pool moved from left to moderate. I mean, I think he probably did, but I'm not sure I could back that up. Like, I'm not certain about that. I would hope that that's what happened, because I'd like to see some hope for people moving, we'll say, further to the right, further to conservatism. Whether it's republicanism or not is kind of irrelevant to me. I don't believe in that category. As I pointed out earlier, it's kind of a bogus way to think about the world, with Trump being president under the Republican banner and all, because he ain't no Republican, that's for sure. But this idea that there's 3 buckets, not 2, and that the important one, the one that actually works and holds things together, is only the conservative bucket, because you have to conserve things over time or you don't have things. I don't know why I have to point this out. It seems silly to me, but also it's 2026. You have to be explicit about very simple, basic things, because people can't get there by their own logic somehow, which really bothers me, actually. It sort of doesn't give me a lot of hope for the world, but that seems to be what we're stuck in. And so I would say, and you've heard me say this before, that there's no conservatism in Europe, like from a political standpoint, from a governance standpoint. Would you agree with that? Would you say they're all either moderates or leftists, or would you say they're mostly leftists? Or how do you view that, given my outline, right?
Well, this is interesting. The conservatives in Europe, right, per your outline, are the people who are willing to draw the boundaries.
Yeah.
And the main boundaries in the EU are the ethnic ones. So the conservatives are like, yeah, we want to shoot the people living the next county over, pretty much. Like, you do get those people, actually. You do. They aren't necessarily in power anywhere, I think, properly. But yeah, there's some people that will do that kind of stuff. More principled people, sort of, who are principled towards other kinds of purposes, or the sort of law or things like that. I don't really see many of them. I don't really see that many at the end of the day. And all of these, even slightly sort of conservative parties, they seem to be conservative until they get into power, and then they're really not anymore. Then they're willing to compromise.
Yeah. Interesting.
And you can see how the leftists in Europe, they are unwilling to draw even the ethnic boundaries or recognize them. They're the ones who
Right.
are for the globalism, for the this sort of like immigration, and for friendship between everybody, and that sort of thing. I've heard of some things of old European aristocrats kind of waiting for monarchy to come back. You do hear that. How much money they have or how much influence they have, not sure. Do they have the skills to be aristocrats? Maybe. They probably do. They probably have very good dining manners and things like that. Whether they can fight in a duel, maybe, not certain. Whether they're willing to like chop the other guy's head off to make a point, also not sure. Not sure. Haven't really met them that much.
That would be exemplification of the virtues and values, whatever those happen to be. And those, in theory, well, the 7 virtues, we'll say, should certainly usurp ethnical boundaries, right? Like all ethnicities should be able to agree on those virtues. Maybe not the values associated with them and how that's implemented, but I'm not sure that's a minus. Like I think that's probably fine. It was fine during the entire medieval period, after all. So, like, seems reasonable to me. Um, but I wonder, because for me, my sort of vision of this is that the way this used to work is you were raised within whatever class you were in. And we can argue about how many classes, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's hard to say, right? There's different ways to divide it. But if you were raised in the noble class, you were at least given a basic, we'll call it education, but it's probably closer to training on how to view the world from the collective viewpoint. And so that would be the more important thing. And I think in the US, we have replaced that with an understanding of the classics. And I'm like, I might agree that the basics of the classics are important, but I don't think just reading the Republic, especially given nobody can comprehend what that book says, see my various 3 videos on that. Um, I don't think that's gonna cut it. Like, you still need to be able to think in like I mean, the allegory of the cave is perfect, right? So everybody seems to misread that and think it's about an individual person or something, or a single person. And if that's what you think that allegory is about, you have a very low comprehension, or you've never read it. I don't know which it is. I can't say, but it's definitely one of those two things, because the real answer is that no, Plato is making, throughout the entirety of the Republic, by the way, not just there, but clearly in book 7, he's making a very important point about the sacrifice of the individual for the good of the collective. Like, that's actually what that's about. Um, and yes, that's a high contrast system that is, we'll say, caught up in the structure of the Republic, right? Like there's an allegory in the beginning and an allegory at the end, and they're contrasted by what's in the middle, basically. And that's sort of, super important. Um, so I think that in the past, these elite classes would be given additional training, and it's interesting too, because you see this at the opening of Game of Thrones has this, right? Where the king's cutting off someone's head and explaining to his son why that had to happen. Oh, that's actually important. We have to sacrifice this individual because we're the good guys, and this is goodness being manifest in the world. And I think that's why people are attracted to that, because they see this weird message that you don't see in most other stories. And then, of course, George R. R. Martin's an idiot and can't write to save his ever loving soul, much less tell a story, and messes the rest of the thing up, because he can't live in a conservative world, in a world where there are clear, bright lines and they're exemplified and they're held to. Like, he can't afford that because he's a freak. I can just tell you. I know all kinds of things about that guy, and they're all horrific. Um, and so I think in Europe they still have that sense. We never had that sense in the United States, like, ever. Like, we built all this from the ground up. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't there, because it was. We had a class system. We had we did away with it with all the suffrage movements. Women's suffrage was the last suffrage movement, not the first, by the way. For some reason, we're letting non-landholders vote in the United States, which is kind of weird to me. I wouldn't do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way it's unfolded here, because of the equality doctrine that we're sort of trapped in. But I think that's a problem. So I did want to get your take on Manuel's comment here. The principled people are, I think, bound to decorum in Europe. I think decorum is one expression of whether or not you're principled, but I don't know that that cuts it. There is a highly traditional foundation for right behavior, but I would link that to manners and politeness, Manuel. I wouldn't link that to conservatism at all. What do you think, Gustavs?
Very what you're saying, but
Well, nope, you're not coming through again. Your microphone is weird today.
sorry. think I think yeah, the people are very very polite, and part of that politeness is not really expressing what you think, and a part of that politeness has blended with tolerance and things like that. It would be it back in the day, it would be impolite not to challenge someone to a duel in certain circumstances.
Right.
If they offended you and you don't challenge them to a duel, it means you think that they are below you, or that what they said didn't matter, and you're not giving them a chance to um, properly reconcile, because will nothing other than spilled blood will cover the offensive statement,
Mm.
right? So by getting rid of for example, duels or other sorts of challenges, you turn into a super tolerant, very touchy society, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Without the conflict and the constant feedback that the conflict provides, which is good information. It's important information. Yeah, things sort of go away. So, young God, the further you are from the city, the more stuff. Well, I, I don't know, man. I grew up around Boston, and Whitey Bulger killed quite a few people in the city. I know a guy from a village where they killed a guy because rural village justice is still a thing. If you want it to be, yeah, well, I mean that's true in Appalachia. You go to Appalachia, or my buddy, he came on the early live streams. Um, he was talking about this because he lives up in Appalachia in the mountains there, um, and he has internet. It's a miracle. And he would talk about this. No, 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 no. The biker gangs would take care of you if you were beating your wife. And, if you didn't stop, somebody might end up finding your body, but maybe not. It all depends. And then so, yeah, that's still a thing, and that's certainly a thing down here. And I think it scales. I mean, I think down here in the South where I'm at, the elites have no problem, believing stories in such a way that if somebody who's not old Southern money happens to get ripped off for $1 million or $2, that's probably okay because whatever, right? Like they have an excuse for the behavior. They have a story, a narrative that allows them to look past a potential injustice. Like that's definitely a thing down here for sure. Also, there are gators, and sometimes people's bodies never get found. And so both things happen for sure. And I don't think that a city function. I think that when you try to make justice, we'll say the sole responsibility of the highest part of the hierarchy, things are going to collapse instantaneously. I mean, I would argue that's what collapsed Napoleon's entire project. And we're still copying Napoleon. Like we're still drawing lines on maps, inventing types of governance, calling it a government, and saying, well, that's a people. And it's like, no, governance and people have no overlap. Except that a people needs to be able to govern themselves primarily because it's too much stress. Like, what are you going to do? Parade everybody before the king for every little infraction? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Like, everybody would lose in that case because you got to get to the damn king, and then you got to wait in line to talk to the damn king, and then the king's got to make a decision on very little information, right? Because he doesn't know you. He doesn't know this other guy's ripped off 5 other people in the village that never got reported. Like, it's insane. Like, that would be nuts. And we want that universal answer. I understand that reduced answer because it allows us as an individual person to understand the world. But that ain't gonna happen. Like, you just need to let that go, and then things get a lot easier because you can deal with them locally, right? You can take the tarp and put it over your own pickup bed when you're driving around my town because that's the law now, unless it's empty. If it's empty, it's fine. But if you have stuff in it, you better put that tarp over it. So I don't know. Do you see a lot of we'll say village justice, as Jan God likes to call it for some reason? Or
I'm not from the village, not from the village, so
I didn't think so.
no. No.
I didn't think so. Yeah, well, Gustavs, what do you think? You ready to wrap it up? It's been like 2.5 hours, so
I am very ready to wrap it up. what do I think? I would like to get some conclusion about 2026 and about the things that are happening now. Um, so maybe you can say something about that while I think of something to say. So I'm
Perfect.
sure you have something.
I would be happy to do that. Yeah, I mean, are there going to be major themes given the level of chaos that we're experiencing and the fact that as I've said this many times, it's going to increase. Like things are going to get more chaotic, not less, which means everyone is going to see what they consider a promising sign that's going to fix something, like whether it be, you know, oh, so and so has started a new college tour, right? Or the Epstein files will be released in full, or whatever nonsense thing it is that's really just a bread and circus. Glad you fell for it. Conspiracy, not bag. They're all going to see what they want to see. And then they're all going to get disappointed because it's never going to have the result that they expect because they don't know how the world works, right? And fair enough. It's very hard to know how the world works. You're in it. It's hard to see things clearly when you're in them, right? It's the fish in the aquarium problem. You're never going to get outside of the world by definition. It's the thing you are trapped in. So that's never going to happen. And so, are there themes? I think the big theme, or maybe the single largest theme, is going to be identity. And I'm fully prepared to be wrong about all this because it's chaos, baby. I think identity is going to come up. I don't think it's going to be the meaning crisis, but I think there's going to be arguments over what is good sense making. How that's going to be phrased, I don't know. It might not be phrased with those terms, but I think that theme is going to come up. And just because three is a good number, I'll try to round it out with three. I think the other thing that I see is this pattern of disillusionment with these larger frames, with worrying about Gaza, Ukraine, the tiff between Poland and Russia, whatever that entails this week, and more focus on the local. And I that's going to create its own struggle as people focus on the local because they don't have this local skills anymore, right? Except for the conservatives. The conservatives have always just focused local. That's why you don't see them in the discourse. I mentioned this. I've mentioned this many times. Conservatives aren't going to get on YouTube and start YouTube channels for the most part, maybe one or two, but they're not going to because they don't believe that that works. They don't want to add to the problem, and they're busy. Like they're actually building stuff so that we have an internet. Like the people that run the internet are more likely to be conservative than the people on the internet, and that will always be true, right? Um, and so I think this struggle with like, how do I knit my own clothes? How do I cook my own food? How do I write? Some people call it adulting. I think I did a thing on adulting actually at one point. I think that's going to become the third big theme. And I'm prepared to be wrong about at least one of those, but I don't think I'm wrong about two of them. And I don't know which two. Like I don't know, right? It's chaos all the way down. So yeah, how do you wanna wrap that up?
I I think 2026 will be the comeback of socialism in a big way. I think it's going to be a big deal,
Hmm.
and people are going to focus on that a lot and have talks about it a lot. And I'm extrapolating that from the guy in New York, and people actually not talking about how he's a socialist that much. And if they are, they seem a bit confused about what the implications of that are, and also about Venezuela and how Venezuela is sort of a socialist place, and how, yes, how, what was I going to say? Yeah, yeah, I think that's all. Yeah, and about how Europe is actually quite socialist and unaware of it.
That's interesting. So you think they're unaware of their level of socialism now?
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. So yeah, I mean, I'll just post the link for the trick of socialism so that you can understand how that trick works and why it works so reliably. We'll say, and then you can watch the last big video I released with the doc animation, and then the next one that's coming out tomorrow early morning. You don't have to watch it when it comes out. It's fine. And for more information on how this works, we'll say from from a human behavioral perspective, and then you'll maybe understand because I like that. I like that particular prediction. Any other predictions or?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. Well, I like that. Well, thank you, Gustavs. I appreciate you joining. And look, everybody, if you want more of this, like Tuesday, or maybe you want some other day and some other time videos, comment below and let me know. And maybe I'll just fire up live streams, once every couple of weeks or something on the same day, or maybe even once a week on the same day, except when I'm out and about. But you have to let me know because otherwise, I can't do it. Got to have feedback. But I do appreciate we had quite a few viewers, and I appreciate everybody watching. Check out the whole channel because if you want to understand the world, you're gonna have a better bet with my channel than with these other crazy people like Academic Agent, who I went off on in one of my live streams because my goodness, is that guy lost? And things will be converging. So a lot of people will be talking the way I've been talking for 5 years. That's happening left, right, and center. Critical drinkers using some of the same language all of a sudden, and Tim Pool and those guys. It's all converging on certain themes, and it's worth considering that things are going to seem to get more extreme in a way, but they are not. Like the discussion about whether or not you should kill people has already bubbled up, and I think that's something that's going to be discussed more. Whether that's going to be a major theme, I don't think so. I think it'll quickly go to the larger frame of something along the lines of religion. But we'll see how it pans out. And if you have thoughts about any of this, please feel free to comment. And look, we'll see you all next time. Have a lovely rest of your day. And maybe Gustavs will join us again soon. Talk to you later, guys.